Okay. Bismillah wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum. I'm just gonna try to finish up the entire whatever I have left, and I plan on this being the last session, inshallah. So last time we talked about the Tanzamat, which was kind of like an era of the Ottoman Empire, and they were kind of like they were like around the 1870s, you could say, but they lasted for around 30 years. And one of the biggest factors to their downfall was that they're pretty much doomed to fail. Like the entire goal was to reform a good chunk of the empire, and that chunk of the empire didn't even want to reform. So you can't really reform something that doesn't want to be reformed. They were trying to please Europe, but kind of forgot about their own people. And another factor was that they were trying to unify a really diverse nation. They wanted to Ottomanize everyone, because now with all like the new nation states popping up, they're all based off of like one common ethnicity. But the Ottomans were around much longer than before that. There's no such thing like that. They were just an empire, and they had a lot of people in there, and they wanted to Ottomanize everyone. Most people didn't want that. They kind of wanted to like copy and paste some European policies that just did not work with the Ottoman Empire into the Ottoman Empire. And that's not how you reform, but they were in a rock and a hard place. So it's like pretty much impossible to do, to please everyone. And one very clear event that marked the end of the Tanzimat was the transition between Sultan Abdul Majid to Sultan Abdul Aziz, which was very smooth, one of the smoothest transitions in history. And like nothing, no one was against it. It was just really smooth. But the Tanzimat pretty much died after this transition, because under his reign, the last Tanzimat reformer died. So no one really picked up where he left off. And after this, many people started to see the negative effects of the reforms. A lot of going back and forth where many people vied for power and control. Because once you have a big power vacuum, people try to fill it in. That's how the Ottomans formed. A big power vacuum when the sultans of Rum fell, they formed. But after the Tanzimat fell, a big power vacuum opened and people started to control or vie for the power. And a majority of people started to resent European influence and government. So they like starting to kick out.
Can you remind us what Tanzimat is?
Tanzimat is just like the era of the Ottoman Empire, like in 1870s, where they tried to reform the empire in like their own ways. So it's just like a party. Think of it like a party that, like a political party that tried to reform. Yeah. So it wasn't only internal factors that ended the Tanzimat, but also external factors. Germany was getting stronger, Russia was getting stronger. There was rapid successions before, these two, that led to a lot of instability. A new movement started to grow where people wanted something like constitutional monarchism. This is all of them in the world. There was pretty much only a few powers that had constitutional monarchism. You'll see Britain, which had Canada and Australia and stuff like that. And also in purple, the Ottoman Empire. So even some nations that came out of the Ottoman Empire still wanted that constitutional monarchism, where like they have the Sultan and they also have Congress that goes along with it. And this might be surprise some of you, but it was mainly pushed by and supported by the ulama. Yeah, the ulama were slowly losing power, and this was a way to regain their power. But by a couple years, pretty much everyone supported the movement for constitutional monarchism, sometimes even for like completely contradictory reasons. Around this time, another major event was on the horizon, the First Ottoman-Russo War, which happened because of some disagreements over territories in the Balkans, right here. And the war was a complete disaster for the Ottomans because no one helped them. They were on their own. And Russia made them sign one of the harshest peace treaties in like history. They lost a lot of territory and a lot of control. Like they pretty much lost the Balkans, and this is really where people were like, like we can't have the Tanzamat anymore. They're like not working. And out with the Tanzimat and in with the new dynasty or regime, or whatever you want to call it, the Hamidian regime, named after Sultan Abdul Hamid, who ruled a very long time. And because of that, he kind of has his own regime. Like it's like he ruled for such a long time, he could say that he had his own dynasty. And he really tried to reform the empire in his own ways. He used a lot of censorship, which was like he clamped down on the press more than anyone else in the empire. But he was a shrewd politician and he understood how to buy time for the Ottomans. Like he never committed himself into trying to reform the government. He was never like, let's reform the Ottomans. He never said that. Instead, he used to like play off the European powers against each other. And he also established a policy of pan-Islamicism, where he put Islam and protecting Muslims at the heart of policy. And this is because now Muslims made up like 75% of his subjects. And he could also use this as a wild card because he's like the leader of the Muslim Ummah. He like a wild card against any power that he rules over the Muslims. Like, hey, look, this huge machine of like the Muslims, they're behind me. He also never took like he did not like to take risks. So that's why he let go of Egypt right here. He let go of Tunisia. I know you can't really, it might be hard to see, but this small square or rectangle picks up right here. So we just move it over. And right here is Tunisia, if you can see my mouse. Right here, that small bit, that's Tunisia, Eastern Rumeli, which now you'll see that, it's still, this part is Eastern Rumeli. Is it? Yeah, it is. He also gave a lot of land to the British in southern Arabia. You'll see here, in Yemen and places like that. And this signified a shift in Ottoman relations with Britain. Like last time I talked about how they were really close friends, now they became enemies. And while the Sultan was willing to literally do diplomatic backflips when it came to most of his provinces, one exception was Arabia, where he would go against everyone who tried to take over like the Hijaz, the ports in Arabia, and up here in the Sham. He's very adamant in not letting anyone take that. But while many people claim that he loved the ulama and traditional Islam, he did, but it wasn't the whole truth. He recognized the power of the ulama to criticize him, and there was a lot to criticize. He banished a lot of ulama, but he was much more, he brought them back to their more glory than they had before. Not complete, but they had more glory. And it was during this time where the Turkish, while late to the party, started developing nationalist movements. So pretty much all the Balkans had nationalist movements where like you want to make a country based on your ethnicity. Even the Arabs, they had their own nationalist movements, places in North Africa. And now, finally, the Turkish started to develop nationalist movements. And this is why Abdul Hamid had to, for the survival of the Ottomans, adopt a pan-Islamic approach to make sure the Muslims are loyal to him. And you'll start to see a lot of opposition sprung up to the Ottomans at this point. There was no middle ground that would satisfy everyone. Most of these revolutionaries are now clumped up under the group known as the Young Turks, started by a group of medical students, like always, that wanted to dethrone the Sultan and abolish the Khilafah. And while all the revolutionaries had the same goal, so like get rid of the Sultan, get rid of the Khilafah, their agenda was sometimes like polar opposites. To look at the Young Turks specifically, the most prominent group, you'll see that they split in two. The one that became dominant started to kind of propagate a new idea where the government follows Turkish and other nationalist movements. And one interesting thing to note is the slogan used by the Young Turks. They use the same one used by the French revolutionaries, liberty, equality, fraternity, except now it's liberty, equality, fraternity, and justice. So you can clearly see who they looked up to. And like all revolutions, they promised big, but didn't deliver much of their promises. They made big changes for sure, but not what they promised. They changed a lot, and there were three ways this wasn't an average revolution. Firstly, it was led by conservatives for their time and not liberals, even if Europe believed that. It was conservatives who led the Young Turks. And secondly, they wanted to restore the government and not destroy it. So they weren't out to destroy the government, they wanted to restore the government. And the last one's kind of weird, but it was successful, which is not normal for most revolutions, but it was successful. They started an election that was actually fair, and due to their popularity, won in a landslide. But there was a group that opposed them that won some seats. This is important. And with the empire sliding further into decline, they couldn't stop that. The Young Turks slid further into authoritarianism, trying to save the Khilafah. So see, in the beginning, they wanted to get rid of it, but now once they became in power, they wanted to save it. And after the effects of the revolution wore off, they started to develop large amounts of opponents who were like on literal opposite sides of the spectrum. Some wanted to be less secular, while others wanted to be more secular. Some wanted to be more liberal, some others wanted to be less liberal, so on and so forth. It got so bad that there was a revolt to the Young Turks, and a new party was formed, which could only be described as everyone else. So it's like, if you're not part of the Young Turks, you're part of this one party. That's how big they were. The Young Turks wanted to keep their power and started to act not so good ways. They arrested and banned opponents. They started like corrupting the election and censoring opposition, and they fell in 1912. This is around their fall. The opposition took over, and all was happily ever after. Jazakallah khair. No, I'm just kidding. History would never be that nice and not so simple. To be completely honest, I'm a bit confused, or I was a bit confused, still am, about really exactly what happened best, but I'm going to try to explain. There was a Balkan crisis going on, and the CUP, the new Young Turks, but they were pretty much the same people, but now they're called the CUP, gained control and became super authoritarian again because of the Balkan crisis somehow. I think they kind of moved the attention away from the Young Turks. But there was a lot that happened in between, which it wasn't important. I'm completely honest. They were shrouded in mystery. The Young Turks, they were completely covered in mystery, except for like a few big names. But that's kind of it. And that's one of the reasons why the Young Turks failed, because they didn't have a charismatic leader to bring the people together. Also, their agenda wasn't like revolutionary. It was kind of like, hey, we're here to keep everything how it is, which that's not a revolution. They did depose Sultan Abdul Hamid and put in his really weak successor, Sultan Mehmed V. This is him. Like, he did not care enough at all. He didn't intervene and try to fix anything. He was like, fine. His successor, Sultan Mehmed VI, from 1918 to 1922, did try to bring power to the Sultan, but he failed. And after that, the Sultanate died. The same applies to Sublime Porte. I'm so sorry, right here. The Sublime Porte, which was kind of like their bureaucracy, which had no hope in restoring their authority. So how did the CUP, the old Young Turks, get or I guess the new Young Turks, get so much power? Well, they were a military power before the revolution. What I mean by that is like they were made up of old Ottoman military officers, these guys. They became very important during this fact became very important during World War I. They were an authoritarian government pretending to be ruling through popular sovereignty. And arguably, more important than the military is their amazing hold on the press. They were like super good at controlling the media. They also started to blur the lines between the Ottomans and the Turks. So what it means to be Ottoman and what it means to be Turk, they kind of like mix the two. And this alienated the other ethnic groups and increased separatism. So people are like, if we're not Ottomans, because we're not Turkish, then why stay with the Ottoman Empire? Even the Balkans, which is in this case not really the yellow, it's more of the orange. Even the Balkans united to defeat the Ottomans. Look how many countries are here because they hate each other, not because they hate each other, because they wanted to be separate, and they united to defeat the Ottomans. They launched a war which was not good for the Ottomans. They got like 37 miles from Istanbul. Europe had to kind of like force them into a ceasefire and de-escalate the situation. The Balkans took Edirne, I think that's how you pronounce it, right here, the red, and which was practically the end of like the strong Ottoman presence in Europe. They'd go back, but not like what it used to be. And what happened next was the Balkan War. So that was not the Balkan War. This was okay. Sorry, I want to talk about Ottoman presence in Europe really quickly. So the line is like how the biggest they were, and I'll focus right here. And over time, they kind of slowly got back and back, further back, until right here. And at some point, they were a little bit after, for just a couple years, a little bit after this line, and got more of Europe. But as you can see, they kept getting pushed back until like they were out of Europe for good. And what happened next was the Balkan War, which Balkans right here, which the Ottomans were able to take back Edirne. And one thing to note is that many historians point to this war as one of the many factors that led to the First World War. It's one of the really important factors. And now the empire of 3 continents is what it was called, is now limited to Asia Minor. It's pretty much as far as Ottoman control went, which was like shattered Ottoman pride. It was really bad for them. And they learned 2 things. They need a great power to sign with, someone really strong. And they did that. Next year they signed with Germany. See the Ottomans are here and Germans somewhere. Because they cannot afford another war. Like speaking of manpower and also speaking of economically speaking. World War I was fast approaching and everyone in Europe knew it. So with the Ottomans scrambling to find an alliance with any European power, they even tried Russia. If you were here last time, they hated Russia, but they even tried to ally with Russia. And no one was accepting for like 2 years until Germany started to change their view and ended up accepting them. So this is like before Germany signed with them. Germany started to change their mindset on why they should accept the Ottomans, and they ended up accepting an allyship, I think is what it's called. And while many people like to say that Germany pressures the Ottomans to ally with them, no, if you look at the broader context, you'll say that it was much more complicated. And in fact, the Ottomans wanted to ally with Germany. Okay. Actually, I'll talk about it in a couple minutes about what Germany did pressure the Ottomans to do. But when it comes to allying, the Ottomans were the ones who pressured the Germans, or they wanted the Germans. And now they tried to solve their disputes. And I'm only going to go over one dispute, Arabia. Britain they badly wanted to have legitimately, so they have it already, but they wanted to legitimately have Yemen and Oman. So they agreed to view Najd, which is like here, Saudi Arabia, you could say, as Ottoman territory. And here's the catch. A man named Abdulaziz ibn Saud ruled the land, and you know where this is going. He forced to become the governor of the Ottomans. He didn't like that. And I'm not going to talk about the history of Saudi Arabia right now, but he was forced to stay with the Ottomans. He'll become important in a second. And at last, by 1914, the Ottomans had no more conflicts, and it seemed by June of 1914, they had no more conflicts, and it seemed as if they could finally kind of like reorganize for future conflicts. So they went from Asia Minor to a little bit bigger. And then the war broke out, World War I. The Ottomans declared neutrality, because here it says in darker purple, it's like the people actually fighting, and here's like, oh yeah, we're just allied with them, we're not fighting, but they were neutral. And when Germany didn't immediately win like they wanted to, they really pressured the Ottomans to fight a global jihad against the Allies. So this is what the Germans ended up really pressuring the Ottomans. They pressured the Ottomans to join World War One. Yes, they did do that. Um, and Germany was actually they made a really good deal with the Ottomans if they joined the war. Obviously, this was meaningless since they lost, but that's besides the point. Um, there was no more going back. They they wanted two main things from joining the war: more land and more economic freedom. And when they did join the war, they did much better than anyone expected. They fought really well on multiple fronts. Like I said, they called jihad, but that didn't change anything, jihad. Um, and one big change that happened because of, well, not because of, the Ottomans really helped, was that they helped start the Bolshevik Revolution. So they kind of, since they were doing so good against Russia, it started the revolution inside Russia. So they didn't go in like, hey, you guys should start a revolution. But since they beat Russia a lot, they kind of let this guy, Lenin, do it, what he did. Also, Russia was not able to get any resources because they controlled all the shipping routes that went into Russia. Oops, my bad. And the Ottomans did inflict a lot of damage on the Allies, which like 650,000 casualties on the Allied side. However, the Ottomans lost like 100,000 more people, and the war wreaked havoc on the empire. They had like at first 2.5 million people drafted in the army at the beginning, but at the end, like 300,000 left. Yes, 2.5 million to 300,000. They also spent 10 times their annual budget just for the war. And even though the Russians left, the Allies were actually starting to win, and the Ottomans surrendered at Mudros on October 30th, 1918. So this is forget this cross arrow, this is where Mudros happened, this little place. And one of the most tragic events of the war that I really cannot skip was the Armenian Genocide. The Ottomans deported all but few Armenians from Anatolia in such harsh conditions. Oh, sorry. In such harsh conditions, they kind of like, they didn't kill them personally, but it was really bad. They caused massive loss of life, which is why you'll see a lot of problems there nowadays. I know we're almost done. I do not have enough time, but let's take a couple minutes to look at women's rights movements and how that really kind of flourished and extended further than before to include like feminism and stuff like that. Socialism never did take off like some people would like you to believe. And in fact, it only had like heavy support in the Christian populations. Many elite members of society started to publish journals. While this is not new, they started to openly criticize Islam and call for materialism. And interestingly, this is one of the reasons the Arabs revolted in 1916. Yeah, they've cited this as a reason. The CUP, or the Young Turks, they started to make Islam like private affair rather than public one. Like, yeah, do it in your own home. However, they did also allow for more freedom for the ulama to, have opinions. The ulama, they tried to reconcile Islam with modernity, but it was too much. They all criticized nationalism because it was un-Islamic. You can't have your ethnicity be over your religion. That's not Islamic. Nonetheless, the CUP was mainly influenced by a group of Turkish Islamists, which is why they constructed a modern Islam that kind of like limited Islam to ritual and private life. And their biggest goal was Turkism. I don't know, like everything Turkish. Right. Let's not. While I don't like to get too deep into the economy because I'm not that interested, one thing I do want to share is the CUP's economic plan, which is like super weird. They wanted to open up, but mainly isolate itself. And when it started to isolate itself, economically speaking, before the war, they drafted like 1 in 2 males, which decreased the population. So like half the people couldn't work because they were out fighting, and so widespread shortages. They supported Muslim Turks only. They wanted a Muslim upper class, a Muslim Turkish upper class. And the weird part is that this plan failed. It's not like it's in and of itself having like making the Muslim Turks the upper class is like, yeah, that's bad, but they couldn't even do that. More non-Muslims owned companies than Muslims, and they were like, you know, higher up, I guess. And to be fair, it's really hard to like accurately talk about them because of the war, which makes sense. They tried to bring back paper money, but after the third time, you know, it's gonna fail. This is the fourth time actually. But when I was reading, I came across a law that the CUP said people can't cut a $1 bill to make a $0.50, and they couldn't cut $5 bill to make $2.50. I guess people were doing that enough where they had to make a whole law. The only good thing that happened to the economy was in the last year of the war, they actually sold like a lot of bonds, which was worthless in the long run because, well, the government can't buy those bonds back because there was no more government. And I know I'm jumping the gun. I'm just going to talk about debt. Actually, there was a lot of debt. We'll say that 130 million of their currency. And it was kind of after the Ottomans fell, it was given out to all their other nations. Like Turkey had 35 million. The Greeks, the Serbs, the Croats, the Slovenes, Syria, Lebanon would each pay 11 million. The rest paid less. For instance, like Yemen paid 26,000. Yeah. And finally, let's talk about the collapse of the Ottomans. Oh my, I really do not have a lot of time. Okay, inshallah, I'm gonna go a couple minutes over if that's fine. Right. So since 1915, the European powers have made agreements on how to split territories in the empire. They're like, it's coming, we know, let's try to figure out how we're going to split it up. And the most famous being the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which is most famous for the splitting up Syria and Jordan and Palestine. And there were conflicting promises made to like leaders in Arabia. The British made deals with seven. Oh, can you guys hear that? Oh,
Yes, I can hear it.
okay. I hope they're fine.
Do you want to go check?
No, I think Mama and Bob are home. I guess it's fine.
That's fine. You're fine.
Okay. So the British made deals with 7 different leaders in Egypt alone. Britain fused Mosul, Baghdad, and Basra to form Iraq. So they kind of like mixed in these 3 really big cities to make Iraq. And the biggest challenge was the Jordan River, which the Ottomans strongly rejected. Like they were like super firm in rejecting it until they had to fall. Like they took it down with them. And Britain ended up controlling both sides. I'm sure everyone is familiar with what's going on and the history of Palestine. While I could spend hours talking about it, sadly I can't. I have minutes. So please, I wish I could have talked a lot about it, but you know, inshallah, that'll be something in the future. The Arabian rebellion or revolt was pretty complicated with 2 major players. Like I said, Abdulaziz ibn Saud and Sharif Hussein. And simply by looking at the map, you can see that the Saudis won because there's no country called Husseinia. I don't know. There was no country named after Sharif Hussein or his clan or tribe or anything like that. So the Saudis won. But now let's look at Anatolia, the heart of the Ottomans. And it might surprise many, and it definitely did to me, that the Europeans actually split up Anatolia. Istanbul is still sticking with the Ottomans, but now it's an international city. And Kurdistan, which is this, it's this blue thing, a little bit less though, but it's this blue thing, actually being something that existed, which now doesn't even exist. Armenia is huge compared to its old self, or compared to it is now. But the Turkish nationalists, in one of the most crazy episodes in history, managed to unite Anatolia under modern day Turkey. This thing, oh, this is a better map. Yes, this is Kurdistan, and this is Armenia. So this does not exist today, and this is much smaller. And this is an international state, if that's what it means. And Turkey is apparently a U.S. mandate, which doesn't last, because the Turkish War of Independence, they won, which is like no one expected. Really crazy. If you just look at lectures, you'll see how amazing it was. And this signifies the first major challenge to the new world order, which is going to be important. They had a coup de grace, not a coup d'etat, a coup de grace. I'm assuming it was more graceful, to an empire that really fell a while before. So they took over an empire that was already fell. And the final piece of the empire, the Khilafah, was abolished on May 3rd, 1924. This is the war for independence. See, like they pushed up, pushed down, pushed out. They even took Istanbul, which was cool or good for them, I guess. A lot could be go over this. The partition of the Ottoman Empire. Sorry, this is the abolishment of the Khilafah, final Khalifa. And the partition of the Ottoman Empire was not a clean or smooth process and was very messy. And my goodness, we're really running late. Is it fine if I go over a little bit? Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Now if you have to go somewhere, I'm just gonna do a couple minutes. So yeah, but I think this is important. To look at the CUP or the cup in retrospect, like looking back at it. Even though it started out super opposed to Sultan Abdul Hamid II, they ended up following much of his policies. And one really symbolic picture is at the funeral of Sultan Abdul Hamid. We see like all the big names of the CUP who hated him, like following his casket and like, being very respectful to him. So while policies did not change, attitude definitely did, most clearly seen in religion, which religious members of society losing a lot of influence in the empire, and people started to rally behind ethnicity and not religion. Even Sharif Hussein led the revolt for an Arab nation, not a Muslim thing. It was an Arab nation. The second major impact of this CUP or the CUP was legitimizing a non-liberal government in liberal ways. And the best way to understand this is to look at the press. While it looked like there was a free press, the CUP tightly controlled them. And this aspect remains in nations that came out of the Ottoman Empire. Like, look at all the oppressive dictatorships in the Balkans. Some people forget about the Balkans, in the Balkans and the Middle East. They found it necessary to hold elections, even if it's definitely not fair. Like, it's clear, like no one's winning 99.9% to 0.01%. That was obviously not fair, but they felt like it was necessary to hold it. The CUP had this sense of dualism in a lot of idea. And one very nice quote from a book that I read, A Brief History of the Late Ottoman Empire, was that they kept the Sultan but introduced a committee. They maintained the Islamic identity of the regime, but they endorsed secularism. They espoused Turkism, which they wanted, like they pushed Turkism, yet professed Ottomanism. They advocated democracy, but they practiced repression, attacked imperialism, but courted empires, and proclaimed etatism, I think it's French for something, while promoting liberal economics. So they had like, I'm here, but here, and here, but here, and here, but here, and here, but here, because they wanted to try to impress everyone or be with everyone. And last time with the series of Al-Andalus, I concluded with Ibn Khaldun and his theory of empires. And while I don't like repeating myself, I don't know, cause it makes me feel nice because I went like full circle. What I'm ending with last year, I'm ending with this year. And so I will kind of read sort of what I read last year, but instead with the Ottomans. Ibn Ibn Khaldun was born in Tunisia in the 14th century, and both his parents died to the Black Death. And he's one of the most famous people post-Golden Age and pre-modern age Islam. Like after 1258, when the Mongols sacked Baghdad, and before the Ottomans fell in 1924. So he's like one of the most famous people in there. And he's famous for writing a history book with many novels, but he's actually more famous for writing the introduction to the history books. So he wrote the history of North Africa and dedicated the introduction, or al-Muqaddimah, Ibn Khaldun, that's Ibn Khaldun, the al-Muqaddimah, where it explores the nature of society and how history unfolds, has many big chapters from like sociology, politics, urban life, economics, and philosophy. And this was new because unlike for the past 2,000 years, their approach to writing was like explaining history, or it was just writing history and not explaining what happened. It was like this happened because this happened because this happened and this happened, which caused that to happen, which caused that to happen. Not like, oh, this happened and why did this happen? Which he did, really focused a lot on that. And one of the key insights that he made was focus on something called asabiyya, which is really hard to translate, but it literally means the opposite of open-minded. It means closed-minded. But in this sense, it means like a close community that works together. And to him, no one had better asabiyya than the nomadic Bedouins. And he cites this as a big reason why they went on to conquer all that they did. And he writes that this is why they succeed, but it's also why they fail. While these same Bedouins conquered cities, they would slowly try to live a more comfortable life and then become weak. And this makes it easier for another group with stronger asabiyya to come and destroy them. So he has like each dynasty or each political entity had 4 generations. Create or conquer a state, make it big and rich, usually the Golden Age, start to live a comfortable life, it gets conquered, or in some rare cases, starts to reform itself. And this works on almost anything. And this was like last year I talked about Al-Andalus, it worked perfectly with Al-Andalus, which makes sense because they were only like a century or two before he did live in before he lived, and he also lived in North Africa. But it works with other entities too. So when I finished researching the Ottomans, I wanted to see if it still holds true. Because I wanted to. If you look at their origins, I would say they had the same level as the Mongols and the Bedouins when it came to asabiyya. So it had a lot of asabiyya. And with that, they were able to push up against all the other Turkic tribes and eventually the Byzantines. The second and third phases are very similar. And we do see that after a short while, it wasn't a couple, maybe like 200 years, they got a lot of money fast. And the Ottomans ended up living a comfortable life, which could be said like a little bit before Suleiman, up until Sultan Mustafa III. They lived a comfortable life. They were rich. You know, you could just see all the buildings they built. And then they started to slowly get conquered. Like seriously, it is such a gradual process, insanely long. Like for how big it is and how long it took for them to fall, that is like anyone will tell you that is really, it was like really gradual. But I don't think it should all be attributed to the loss of asabiyya. In fact, I think most of the blame should be placed on the situation. So with Europe as a new superpower, and at first the Ottomans didn't think of Europe as a superpower up until it was too late and they couldn't kind of catch up. And they tried to reform itself, but they found it impossible because they were like a huge empire. And nationalism did not help. A super decentralized system might have helped before, definitely did not help now. So while Ibn Khaldun's theory stands true, it still stands true, there's many other factors that led to the Ottomans besides, you know, they got weak. Jazakallah khairan. I hope you enjoyed and maybe learned from this lecture and this whole series. I started working on this in October. I hope I was able to accurately or simply tell you the history of the Ottomans. Jazakallah khair. This time we recorded our sessions and it'll be on YouTube inshallah. والعصر إن الإنسان في خسر الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. مع السلامة.
الله يجزيك الخير.
وإياكم.
Now for any questions.
Oh, right. I forgot to ask for questions. Yeah, do you have any questions?
What's your session for next year?
My session for next year? I don't know. I seriously have no idea. Last year, I kind of, as soon as I finished at Andalus, I was like, yeah, I want to do the Ottomans next, but now I don't know. Inshallah, if you have any suggestions, I'm very happy. I saw someone else unmuted. Does anyone else have a question?
No, nothing on my end. Good job.
Okay. I think it
الله
was
يجزيك الخير.
Jannah.
I just want to say جزاكم الله خيرا ما شاء الله. Good job, Ahmed.
Oh, yeah. وإياكم. جزاكم خير. Yeah. Okay. If there's no questions, I'm going to, yeah. Okay. مع السلامة.